On the 20th of March, 1811, the cannons of Paris fired 101 times. 100 shots, and the crowd held its breath, as they always did, because 100 meant a daughter. But then, the 101st boom rolled across the Seine like the voice of God himself. Paris went mad with joy. A son, an heir. The King of Rome had arrived. The Napoleon dynasty, the greatest military empire the modern world had ever seen, finally had its future. 4 years later, it was over. The empire was ash. The father was exiled to a rock in the Atlantic, and the child the cannons roared for, the boy the whole world believed would inherit the earth, was being slowly, methodically erased. When the empire fell, what happened to the child it was built for? His name, at birth, was Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph Bonaparte. He was called the King of Rome before he could walk. He had a governor, a staff of attendants, a wardrobe of miniature military uniforms, and the destiny of a continent resting on his infant shoulders. He had everything. Except, as it turned out, time. When Napoleon abdicated in April 1814, his son was 3 years old enough to sense the fear in the servants' eyes, not old enough to understand why his father kept leaving, and why, one day, he simply didn't come back. His mother, Marie-Louise, Archduchess of Austria before she was ever Empress of France, took the boy home. To Vienna, to her father, Emperor Francis I of Austria, to the court of the Habsburgs, to the family that had just helped destroy everything her husband had built. Schönbrunn Palace. You've seen images of it, no doubt, a fairy tale palace of 1,441 rooms, manicured gardens stretching to the horizon, gilded ceilings so high they seemed to belong to a different sky. To a child, it must have seemed like the whole world. That was precisely the point. Because for the son of Napoleon Bonaparte, the world was Schönbrunn. He would not be permitted to leave it in any meaningful sense. Not physically, not politically, and, most devastatingly, not psychologically. The Austrian court, under the iron guidance of Foreign Minister Clemens von Metternich, the most cunning political operator in Europe, understood that this child was a living symbol. And symbols, if not carefully managed, become rallying points. So they did something more effective than imprisonment. They performed an identity erasure. The name Napoleon was forbidden in his presence. French, the language of his birth, the language his father had whispered to him, was discouraged and eventually stripped from his daily life. He was given the title Duke of Reichstadt, a minor Austrian duchy that carried all the prestige of a footnote. He was renamed Franz. Imagine, for a moment, being told that the name your parents gave you, the name you shared with the most famous man alive, was dangerous. Imagine being handed a new name like a new set of clothes. Imagine watching the adults around you flinch every time someone accidentally spoke a word of the language your mother had whispered to you as an infant. That is not a childhood. That is a psychological operation. The Austrians had not put the King of Rome in chains. They had done something far more elegant. They had put him in gold. But here is what the Habsburgs did not account for. You cannot erase a legend from a boy who can read. And as the Duke of Reichstadt grew older, he began to read everything he could find about his father. The cage was golden, but the bird inside it was beginning to remember it had wings. They called him L'Aiglon, the eaglet. The name was whispered first in France, where his father's legend had not died so much as gone underground, burning quietly beneath the surface of the Bourbon Restoration, like an ember that refused to go out. By the time the Duke of Reichstadt was 14, 15, 16, the eaglet was becoming aware of exactly what he was, and exactly what that meant. His grandfather, Emperor Francis, was not unkind to him. He was given tutors, military training, a regiment of his own, the 60th Infantry. He threw himself into soldiering with a ferocity that alarmed and impressed his instructors in equal measure. Here, finally, was something that felt true: movement, purpose, command. His father had written to him from St. Helena, letters full of advice, instruction, and a kind of desperate, long-distance fathering that only underscored the abyss between them. Make yourself worthy of the destiny that awaits you. Those words are documented. They were read. They were kept. We can only imagine what they cost a teenager to receive. And then, in May 1821, when the eaglet was 10 years old, Napoleon died on St. Helena. The most famous man in the world was gone. And somewhere in Vienna, a boy who was not allowed to use his own father's name had just lost the only person on earth whose blood matched his. Metternich, watching all of this with the cold precision of a chess grandmaster, grew increasingly uneasy as the boy grew into a man. Reports circulated, hushed, urgent, that French Bonapartist factions were in contact with the young duke, that plots were being hatched, that some dreamed of a restoration. The boy's mere existence was a political event. He was watched, his correspondence was intercepted, his friendships were monitored. He fell deeply under the influence of Count Dietrichstein, his imperial governor, a man of genuine affection perhaps, but ultimately an instrument of Habsburg control. The eaglet was not imprisoned, he was simply managed. Every room he walked into was full of beautiful furniture, impeccable manners, and invisible walls. He wanted to fight in the 1831 Polish uprising. His grandfather refused. He asked to be given a meaningful military command. He was given ceremonial roles. He wanted to go to France, just once, just to see it. He never did. Every door he pushed against was padded in silk and locked with a smile. But the Bourbons and the Habsburgs were only his jailers. The true enemy was already growing within his own body, and even Metternich could not intercept that dispatch. There is a particular cruelty in the way history chose to destroy Napoleon's son. The father had been a force of nature, relentless, kinetic, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating in 15 minutes, dictating letters while dressing. His body was a weapon. His energy was almost supernatural. The son began to cough. Tuberculosis, la maladie romantique, as the French cruelly romanticized it, was already consuming the generation around him. Keats had died of it. Shelley's circle was riddled with it. It was the great scythe of the 19th century, cutting down the young and vital with a particular taste for the beautiful and the gifted. The Duke of Reichstadt began showing symptoms by 1830. He was 19. And here is the brutal, almost Greek irony at the heart of this story. His doctors believed, and there is compelling medical and historical evidence to support this, that the isolation accelerated his death. A young man of immense vitality, denied meaningful action, denied purpose, denied the outlet his nature demanded, forced to sit in palaces while his blood sang for the battlefield, withered. The body, when the soul is caged, does not always wait for external enemies. He was 20 years old when he confided to his attendant, Count Prokesh von Osten, one of the few people he genuinely trusted, "I shall burn out quickly, but it doesn't matter. I have lived more than those who measure their years by decades." Let that sit with you for a moment. A 20-year-old boy, the son of the most powerful man who ever lived, speaking those words with the weary acceptance of someone who already understands that the story is ending. He did not rage against it, or if he did, the raging was private. In public, he maintained the dignity of a prince. In private letters, we see something else. A man who understood, with devastating clarity, exactly what had been done to him and exactly why. He knew he was a symbol. He knew his captivity served a political purpose. He knew that the very name he had been denied was the source of his imprisonment. And he knew by 1831 that he was running out of time to do anything about it. We think of dynastic pressure as a historical curiosity, something that happened to people in powdered wigs. But ask any member of a famous modern family what it is to grow up as the continuation of a legend rather than a person in your own right. The name that opens every door also locks every window. The cage is always golden. By the spring of 1832, his physicians had exhausted their options. The hemorrhages were worsening. The fevers came every night without fail. His mother, Marie-Louise, who had largely abandoned him for a new life, a new lover, a new identity in Parma, came back to Vienna to see him. Whether there was comfort in that reunion or only a deeper grief, history does not fully record. Napoleon II, the King of Rome, the Duke of Reichstadt, the Eaglet, died on July the 22nd, 1832. He was 21 years old and 6 months. He had never once set foot in France. The official response in Austria was muted. A prince had died. A difficult political situation had resolved itself quietly and conveniently in a Viennese bedroom. Metternich, one imagines, allowed himself a private exhale. The response in France was something else entirely. When news of the Duke's death reached France, something complicated and powerful happened. The Eaglet, who had been denied his identity in life, was given it back in death, and then some. He became a martyr. Bonapartist newspapers wrote of him as a prince murdered by isolation. Victor Hugo, who would later write the famous dramatic poem L'Aiglon, spoke of him as a symbol of lost French greatness, stolen by the crowned heads of Europe. Every political faction that dreamed of a French imperial revival suddenly had a face, a story, and a tragedy to rally around. The supreme irony, they had erased him in life to prevent him from becoming a symbol. In death, he became nothing but a symbol. But history rarely leaves a vacuum unfilled. And into the absence left by Napoleon II, the legitimate heir, the son, the Eaglet, stepped a figure both more resilient and more morally ambiguous. Napoleon III, the nephew, the cousin, the survivor. In one sense, the Bonaparte line had done it. Against all odds, against exile, against the Congress of Vienna, against the combined efforts of every crowned head in Europe, a Bonaparte had taken France back. Does this break the curse? Perhaps. But consider what it cost. Napoleon II, the legitimate heir, the one the cannons of 1811 had roared for, the one Napoleon himself had anointed, was dead in a Viennese bedroom at 21. Napoleon III, shrewd, persistent, lucky, clawed to power through political maneuvering, 2 failed coups, and a reading of public sentiment that bordered on genius. The dynasty endured. But the dream, the golden, terrible dream of a son inheriting his father's glory, died in Schönbrunn Palace on a July morning in 1832. And if Napoleon III was the curse-breaking, he was also the proof of what the curse had demanded in sacrifice. Napoleon I rests at Les Invalides. Paris built him a cathedral of a tomb. The world comes from every corner of the earth to stand at its rim and look down and feel the weight of what one human life can contain. And just a few rooms away, quietly, without fanfare, rests his son. Napoleon II was buried in Vienna in the imperial crypt at the Kapuziner Kirche, where Habsburg emperors had been interred for centuries. He was one of them, in death as in life, filed away in the family vault of the dynasty that had consumed him. He stayed there for over a century. Then, and here is the final strange twist that history always seems to reserve for this family. In 1940, Adolf Hitler, in a gesture calculated to curry French public opinion during the German occupation of Paris, ordered the remains of Napoleon II transferred from Vienna to Les Invalides. Let that settle. The boy who was never permitted to go to France in life, who asked and was refused, and asked again and was refused again, was finally carried to Paris by Nazi Germany. As a propaganda gesture, history does not always grant dignity to its victims. Sometimes it grants them only a final, bitter irony. So we come to the question the story has been circling since that 101st cannon shot over Paris. Was there a curse on the Bonaparte bloodline? Not in any supernatural sense. History is immune to magic. But there is a kind of structural tragedy that certain names carry, a gravitational weight that bends the lives of those born into its orbit. The name Napoleon was, simultaneously, the most powerful and the most dangerous inheritance in the 19th century world. It opened a door to greatness, and directly behind that door stood every king, emperor, and minister on the continent, ready to slam it shut. To be Napoleon's son was to be assigned an impossible role before you could speak. To be the continuation of a legend so vast it left no room for a person inside it. His grandfather Francis loved him in his way. His grandfather Metternich used him in his. His mother drifted away toward her own survival. His father, across an ocean, on a dying island, sent letters full of advice for a destiny that would never come. And the boy in the middle, Franz the Eaglet, the King of Rome, Napoleon II, burned through his 21 years trying to find a space between those names large enough to breathe in. The name was not a curse, but names carry expectations. And expectations, when they are large enough, when they are imperial enough, they can fill a room so completely that the person inside them has nowhere left to stand. Here is what you may not know. In 2026, the Bonaparte family line continues. Jean-Christophe Napoleon Bonaparte, born in 1986, great-great-grandnephew of Napoleon I, is considered the current head of the Imperial House of France. He married Countess Olympia von Hohenzollern-Arco-Zinneberg in 2019 in a ceremony attended by European royalty. He is a private equity professional. He does not rule. He does not command armies. He gives occasional interviews about French history and the family legacy. He carries the name with what appears to be a considered, modern grace, neither denying its weight nor being crushed by it. Perhaps that is the answer. The curse was never the name. It was the era. An age of empires where a name like Bonaparte was a political weapon that other men would spend your entire life trying to confiscate. In 2026, a Bonaparte can simply be. The Eaglet could not. He deserved to. When the 101st cannon fired over Paris in 1811, a city went mad with joy for a child who would never sit on his father's throne, never command his father's armies, never once stand on the soil of the country that loved him from afar and mourned him when he was gone. He was the King of Rome who never saw Rome, the eagle who never left his cage,